I told my uncle I couldn't wait for my brother's wedding tomorrow. He looked at me, his face blank for a moment, before saying, "It was last week." For a moment, the words didn't register. My brain tried to make sense of them, but it just couldn't. Last week. As in it had already happened. My brother's wedding, an event I had been looking forward to, was already over. My stomach dropped. My thoughts scrambled, like I'd just fallen from a height without warning, and there was no way to brace for the impact. I stared at my uncle, trying to piece together why no one had told me, why I had been left out. The wedding. Everyone was there except for me. I was the one who wasn't invited, and I hadn't even known. I pulled out my phone, hands trembling. The moment I unlocked it, a flood of photos appeared. My brother, smiling, his bride glowing. Every detail of the day was captured, every perfect moment, except for the one that should have included me. My absence was so complete, it felt as if I never existed. The weight of the truth settled in, heavier than I could have ever expected. There was no coming back from this. I couldn't pretend it didn't hurt. It was worse than if I had known. I couldn't get past the fact that my own family had orchestrated this. I was the one who didn't matter. I stood there for a few moments longer than I should have, staring at my uncle. I couldn't leave just yet, not without some kind of explanation, but no one said anything else. The air around us felt thick, like a conversation was happening without words. Finally, I turned and walked out of his house. I didn't say anything more. I couldn't. My mind was too full, my heart too heavy. What was left to say? My family had already decided what role I played in their lives. The next morning, I couldn't shake the weight of what had happened. I drove toward my parents' house, the same house I had grown up in, the place I always thought of as home. But this time, everything felt different. I wasn't prepared for what I would find when I walked through that door, but I knew I had to face it, whatever the truth was. I didn't have any plan for what I would say or do, what I would say. Oh, I didn't know how I was supposed to act in a place where I had always been expected to disappear. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw the house exactly as it had always been, neat, orderly, the kind of house that looked perfect from the outside. But it didn't feel like home anymore. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my mind was racing, desperate for some explanation, for something to make sense of all this. I stepped out of the car and walked up to the door. The voices from inside drifted through the walls. I could hear them laughing, talking everything as it should be, except for one thing. I wasn't a part of it. I stood at the threshold, my heart pounding in my chest, before walking in. The second they noticed me, everything shifted. Their faces tightened, their postures shifted subtly. It wasn't obvious, but it was enough. They didn't have to say anything. I could feel it, the unspoken understanding that I was not welcome. I didn't wait for an invitation. I didn't need to. I stood in the doorway, letting the silence fill the space between us. I asked the question that had been burning inside me since the night before. Why was the wedding date on my invitation wrong? I didn't get an answer, not a real one, just a series of subtle gestures, avoided glances, shrugs. They weren't sorry. They weren't apologizing for their oversight. I felt it then, the sting of being the one who was never quite seen, never fully included. And as they explained, or rather, justified their actions, it became clear to me that they'd already built a life in which I didn't belong. And they didn't need me there. I was just someone who showed up when it was convenient. Otherwise, I was easily forgotten. They told me that gatherings were easier without me, that my presence, my questions, complicated things. And that's when I realized the wedding wasn't the start of anything. It was the culmination of a long, standing pattern, one I hadn't been willing to see. The story of my family was one where I had always been a background character, useful only when they needed me, easy to push aside when I wasn't. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. The shock was gone, replaced with something far clearer. They had made their choice a long time ago, and I didn't need to keep proving that I mattered to them. In that moment, I realized something else. They'd been using me all along. All the things I did, all the sacrifices, they weren't seen, but the second I stopped offering, they would notice. And I had already made the choice to stop. The weight of that truth sat with me as I turned and walked out of the room. This wasn't the beginning of a new chapter. This was the end of a long, unfinished story that I was finally walking away from. I left the house in a daze. The drive back to my parents' place felt like I was moving in slow motion, the weight of what I had just learned pressing on my chest. It was still hard to believe. It didn't seem real. It felt like a bad dream I couldn't shake. But it wasn't a dream. It was my life, unraveling right in front of me. As I drove, my mind kept racing, thoughts colliding with each other. I hadn't planned for this. I hadn't prepared for the flood of feelings that came with being excluded. But I knew I couldn't let this go. Not anymore. I reached my parents' neighborhood just as the sun began to set. The streets were familiar, almost too familiar. The houses all looked the same, like they had been frozen in time, unchanging. The house I had grown up in sat at the end of the block, perfect and untouched, just the way it always looked. But now, it felt like a stranger's home. I parked the car in the driveway and sat there for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to calm myself. I knew what I had to do, but I wasn't ready. I wasn't prepared for what I might find. The house looked exactly the same. Nothing had changed. But I had. The me who had walked in and out of that house countless times before was no longer the same person. Something had shifted inside me, and I couldn't ignore it. When I stepped out of the car, the air felt different. It wasn't fresh. It wasn't welcoming. It felt tight, like I was walking into a room where no one wanted me. I tried to shake the feeling off as I walked toward the door. Voices filtered through the walls. They were loud, relaxed, unbothered. It was like nothing had happened, like nothing had changed. Except for me. I stood at the door for a moment, hearing them laugh inside, hearing the conversation flow freely. I wasn't part of that. I wasn't included in their world anymore. I opened the door and stepped inside. The second they noticed me, everything shifted. It wasn't obvious, not at first, but I could feel it. The subtle shift in the air, the way their bodies tensed as if bracing for something. Their faces weren't warm or welcoming. Their eyes didn't meet mine the way they used to. I didn't wait for an invitation. I didn't need to. I walked in, and the room went quiet. The kind of quiet that makes everything feel too loud. I didn't know what to say at first. I didn't even know what I was supposed to feel. But then I asked the question that had been burning inside me since I found out about the wedding. Why was the date on my invitation wrong? There was no apology, no real explanation, just small glances, awkward pauses. They shifted in their seats, unwilling to meet my eyes. It wasn't an accident, I realized. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was intentional. They had planned everything carefully, quietly. My exclusion wasn't a mistake. It was a choice they made. The answer didn't come in words. It came in the way they looked at me, or rather, didn't look at me. They explained, in their own way, that gatherings were easier without me, that I made things complicated by asking questions they didn't want to answer. It hit me then. This wasn't just about the wedding. It wasn't just about a single moment in time. It was about years of this. Years of being the one who was there when they needed something, but forgotten when I wasn't useful. I stood there, listening to them talk. My hands were steady at my sides, but inside, my mind was racing. I had been a part of this family for so long, but now I realized I had never really been a part of it at all. The realization hit harder than any argument or fight could. It wasn't about being left out of the wedding. It was about being left out of everything. I didn't argue, I didn't shout. The anger I felt wasn't worth wasting on them. There was no point in fighting for a place in a family that had already made it clear I didn't belong. Instead, I let the silence fill the room. I let them feel the weight of what had happened. I let them feel the shift that had already taken place. I didn't wait for anyone to offer an explanation. I didn't need to hear any more excuses. The truth was clear. I turned away from them, walking toward the door. It wasn't a defeat. It wasn't a surrender. It was a realization that I didn't need to keep fighting for a place that wasn't mine. As I stepped outside, the air felt different again. This time, it wasn't heavy. It wasn't suffocating. It felt lighter, like I was finally free from something I didn't even realize I was carrying. I got into the car and drove away. The road stretched out in front of me, empty and quiet. I didn't know what was next. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was being pulled in a direction I didn't want to go. The decision had been made. It wasn't about them anymore. It was about me, and that felt like the first step toward something I had never allowed myself to believe I could have freedom. After I left my parents' house, I knew I couldn't just keep driving. I didn't know where I was going, but the feeling of being in control, of finally making a decision for myself, was stronger than the pull to return to that familiar place. I ended up at the lake house, the one place that had always offered me peace. I hadn't been there in months, not since I'd started sinking more of my time and energy into keeping my family afloat. But now, it felt like the only place that could give me the space I needed to think. The house was quiet when I stepped inside. There was the familiar creak of the floorboards beneath my feet, the scent of cedar, the faint, comforting smell of wood and earth. For a moment, it felt like home again, like nothing had changed. But I knew better. I set my keys on the counter, and as I looked around, I realized how much work had gone into maintaining this place, work that no one had ever thanked me for. I ran my fingers along the edge of the kitchen counter, remembering the years of upkeep, the repairs, the weekends spent here alone, fixing what my family had either ignored or couldn't be bothered to handle. This place wasn't just a getaway. It wasn't just a piece of property. It had become my burden. I walked into the living room, my footsteps slow, deliberate. The lake stretched out in front of me, its surface calm, reflecting the fading light of the evening. It should have been peaceful. But it wasn't. Not anymore. I needed clarity. The weight of everything that had happened was too much to ignore, so I did what I knew best. I started looking through the paperwork. The cabinet was filled with files, each one documenting the years I'd spent handling every detail of the lake house. Tax notices, repair bills, receipts for work I had done, money I'd spent to keep this place from falling apart. As I flipped through the folders, I realized how much of it had fallen on me. There was the roof repair bill from 2 years ago, the plumbing work from last summer, the pest control services that had to be scheduled every few months. It was endless. And all of it, every single thing, had been paid for with my own money. My name appeared on every invoice, every receipt. But when it came to the family, my contribution was invisible. As I kept flipping through the papers, I found something else. Something I hadn't expected. There were documents related to loans and property agreements, transfers that I had signed without ever being fully aware of the consequences. The lake house wasn't the only thing that had been tied up in my name. I felt sick as I went through it all. I had signed these papers without asking questions, without realizing how much I was giving up. I had been the silent supporter, the one who showed up when needed but was never truly seen. There it was, proof of how my family had relied on me without acknowledging it. They had used me for my stability, my willingness to sacrifice, and had never once stopped to consider how much I had given. I leaned back in the chair, the room spinning slightly. My mind raced. It wasn't just the lake house. It was everything. Every time they needed something, I had been the one to provide. Every time they needed help, I had stepped in. And now I was left holding all of it alone. I reached for my phone knowing I needed to do something. I needed clarity, and that's when I called Jessica. She answered quickly, as she always did. "What's up?" I paused for a moment, taking a breath. I need advice, not comfort. I'm looking at everything right now, and I need to know what to do. Jessica was silent for a moment. "Okay, tell me what's going on." So I did. I told her about the lake house, about the money I had been spending without anyone asking, about the documents I had found. I told her everything, all the things I had kept quiet, about all the things I had convinced myself were just part of being the responsible one. "Monica," she said after I finished, her voice calm but firm, "you need to stop carrying all of this alone. You've been doing it for too long." I knew she was right, but hearing it from her felt like a wake-up call. "We need to get you legal help," Jessica continued. "You need someone who can help you sort this out. Someone who can help you take control." I didn't want to admit it, but she was right. I had been doing everything without ever asking for anything in return, and now I had to take back control before it consumed me. "Okay?" I said, my voice steady. "I'll find someone. I'll figure it out." I didn't hang up right away. I sat there, the phone in my hand, feeling the weight of what was coming. But for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like the beginning of something I could finally take ownership of. I put the phone down and looked around the lake house again. It was mine. All of it. Every repair, every bill, every hour I had spent here. It was all mine. And now I was going to make sure it stayed that way. I didn't know how I was going to fix everything yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I was done letting my family treat me like I was invisible. I was done being the one who always had to clean up their mess. As the evening light faded, I stood up, walked back to the kitchen, and began sorting through the documents again. This time, I didn't feel helpless. I felt ready. Ready to take back what had always been mine. The next day, I woke up feeling different. The weight that had settled over me after confronting my family was still there, but something else had replaced it. A quiet resolve. I knew I couldn't keep carrying the burden of my family's expectations on my own. Not anymore. not anymore. I had taken the first step by reaching out to Jessica, but now I had to act. I needed someone who could help me navigate the mess my family had created. Legal help. A professional. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of papers before me. The receipts, the invoices, the financial records, they all told a story. A story I had never fully seen before, not until now, and it wasn't a story I could just ignore. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts. I hesitated for a moment before tapping the name of the attorney Jessica had recommended. Natalie Cruz. I pressed the call button. It rang once, then twice before she answered. "This is Natalie Cruz." Her voice was calm, professional. "Hi, Natalie," I said, my voice steady, but my heart was racing. "This is Remi Hale. I was referred to you by a friend, Jessica Taylor. I need some help with a property issue." "Of course, Miss Hale," she replied smoothly. "What's the issue?" I explained as clearly as I could, outlining the lake house, the years of financial contributions I had made, and the growing realization that I had been exploited by my family. I told her about the documents I had found and how they had been manipulated into thinking I was just a silent participant in the family's financial picture. Natalie listened without interrupting, taking notes as I spoke. When I finished, she paused for a moment before responding. "It sounds like there's more at play here than just a property issue. You may be dealing with financial exploitation. I'd be happy to help you sort this out." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. That's exactly what I need. I'm not sure what to do, but I know I can't keep ignoring this. I can help you understand your legal rights and responsibilities, but I need to review all the documents you have. We can set up an appointment to go over everything. "Okay," I said, relieved that I wasn't alone in this. "I'll get everything together and let you know when I'm available." After hanging up, I sat back in my chair, looking around the lake house. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was taking control. I wasn't waiting for someone else to make the decisions for me. I wasn't going to let my family continue to manipulate me without ever acknowledging what I had done for them. I started gathering the paperwork, stacking the folders in a neat pile. There was so much, too much. It had been easy to overlook the little things when they added up, easy to dismiss the costs as just part of being the responsible one. But now, I saw the bigger picture. I saw how much of myself I had given away, how much of my time, my money, and my energy had been spent trying to hold everything together for people who never appreciated it. It wasn't just the lake house. It was everything. As I worked through the paperwork, I started to feel a sense of clarity that I hadn't had before. For so long, I had been the one to fix things, to step in when something went wrong, but I had never asked for anything in return. I had never let anyone know how much it hurt to always be the one who did everything without ever being seen. But now, I wasn't going to keep pretending that I didn't matter. I called Natalie again to set up the meeting. "I'll come in tomorrow morning," I told her, determination in my voice. "I'll bring everything." "Great," she said. "I'll see you then." As I hung up, I felt a small wave of relief wash over me. The first step was taken. I was no longer in this alone. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation. I pulled out every document related to the lake house, every piece of paper that told the story of my involvement. It wasn't just about the property. It was about everything I had quietly done for my family, everything I had sacrificed. By the time I finished organizing the files, it was dark outside. The lake was calm, the water still, reflecting the light from the moon. It was peaceful, but for the first time, it didn't feel like enough. I wasn't just holding on to the lake house, I was holding on to all the years of sacrifice, all the things I had done for my family without ever asking for anything in return. And now I was finally ready to let go of the idea that I had to keep doing it all. I had done enough. Now, it was time for me to take back what was mine. Tomorrow, I would meet with Natalie. And things were going to change. The next morning, I arrived at Natalie Cruz's office with the stack of documents under my arm. I felt like I was carrying the weight of my family's history in those files. The moment I stepped into her office, the atmosphere shifted. The tension I had been carrying for so long finally felt like it had a place. Natalie greeted me with a firm handshake, her demeanor calm and professional. "Good to meet you." "Remi," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. "Let's get started." I sat down and placed the stack of papers on the desk. As she began flipping through them, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. I was no longer holding this alone. She was here to help me make sense of the mess my family had left behind. The papers told a story I had known in my gut but never fully realized. There were repairs and maintenance costs, small bills for things I had fixed, and major projects I had funded. And then, scattered throughout the pile, were the loan documents and signed agreements, hidden responsibilities I never fully understood. It all added up to something bigger than I had ever imagined. Natalie moved through the documents with a sharp focus. "You've done a lot of work here," she said after a while, her voice steady. "A lot more than most people would even consider. But these documents, they tell a bigger story." She pointed to the pages that detailed loans I had signed, the debts I had taken on without knowing the full extent of them. "This is where things get tricky," she said. "It looks like your family has been relying on you in ways that go beyond simple financial support. They've tied you into their obligations without your consent." I swallowed, the reality of it sinking in deeper. It wasn't just that I had been giving. I had been drawn into their financial mess without ever being asked, without ever being told. "Do you think they realized what they were doing?" I asked, my voice quieter than I meant. Natalie paused for a moment, flipping through more pages. "It's hard to say. Some of this looks like it was done with intent, like they knew they could count on you without asking. But at the same time, this might just be their way of handling things. They didn't think about the long-term effects." I nodded, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. That's what hurt the most. It wasn't just the exclusion from the wedding, it was the years of being used, of doing the work and never being seen for it. "We can take this to court if you want," Natalie continued, breaking through my thoughts. "You're in a strong position. You've got a record of everything you've done. We can go after the financial manipulation, potentially cut you loose from any further obligations." My heart raced. It felt like I was standing on the edge of something huge, something I couldn't take back. "I don't want to tear my family apart," I said, my voice tight. "I just want to stop carrying their weight." Natalie gave me a knowing look. "You don't have to tear them apart, but you do need to protect yourself. This is about making sure they can't continue using you without consequence. You deserve to have your life back." Her words hit me like a wave, pulling me under and making me realize how much I had been holding back. For so long, had put their needs ahead of my own, thinking it was just what I had to do. But now, I was finally standing up for myself. "I'll take your advice," I said, my voice more certain than I had felt in a long time. "I'm ready to take control of this." Natalie smiled, nodding. "Good. I'll start the paperwork. We'll get this moving." I left her office feeling a strange mix of relief and fear. There was no turning back now. The fight wasn't going to be easy, but it felt like the only way forward. I spent the rest of the day gathering more documents, making sure everything was in order for the legal process. As I looked through the papers, I realized something else, something that hit me harder than anything else. All the sacrifices I had made for my family, all the times I had put their needs above my own, had been done out of love. But love shouldn't feel like a burden. It wasn't just about the lake house. It was about reclaiming my life. It was about saying no when I had spent so many years saying yes. The next few days felt like a whirlwind. The paperwork, the phone calls, the meetings. But through it all, one thing became clearer. I wasn't just protecting my property, I was protecting my future. And for the first time in a long time, I could see that future clearly. I wasn't going to let my family dictate my choices anymore. I wasn't going to let their expectations hold me back. As I prepared for the next step, I knew there was still a long road ahead. But I was ready. I had finally taken control. And nothing, not even my family, was going to take that away from me. 2 days later, I was sitting in my office building when I saw them. My parents, my brother, they were standing near the reception desk, their backs to me, speaking to the receptionist in hushed, urgent tones. I recognized the body language, the stiff postures, the way they crowded into the space, trying to claim territory they no longer had a right to. I didn't have to approach them to know what was happening. They were trying to get to me. They were trying to force their way back into my life, into my space, and I wasn't going to let them. I paused for a moment, leaning against the column that separated the reception area from the elevators. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for. Maybe a sign or some kind of clarity. But what I saw instead was the unmistakable desperation in their actions. They were cornered, trying to push their way into my world once again, with no consideration for the fact that they'd long since crossed a line. I took a deep breath and steadied myself. I wasn't going to rush in and try to fix things. I wasn't going to be the one to explain their behavior to the receptionist or to calm them down. That was their job, not mine. The security guard, Owen, approached them. I'd seen him around the office for years, always calm, always collected. He wasn't intimidated by them, which I couldn't say about myself. I watched him speak to them, his presence immediately shifting the balance of the situation. His steady voice, his firm stance, it was like the atmosphere around my family started to crack. For once, they weren't in control. Owen started to guide them away from the desk, explaining the building's visitor policy. It should have been a small moment, but for me, it was huge. They were being told no, and it wasn't me doing it. My family didn't take well to being told no. I could see that even from where I stood, hidden from their view. Their bodies tensed, their faces darkened. They weren't used to this kind of resistance. They had always gotten their way with me. But not anymore. I didn't move. I stayed where I was, my back pressed against the cool column, watching as Owen stepped in between my family and the receptionist. He was taking control of the situation, and in doing so, he was giving me the space I needed to reclaim my life. I didn't need to go over there and smooth things over. I didn't need to justify my actions or explain why I had drawn this boundary. For once, someone else was handling the mess. For once, I wasn't the one expected to fix everything. As I stood there, I realized how much I had internalized the need to always be the one who stepped in, who solved the problems, who made peace. But now, I was starting to let go of that role. I didn't move from the column, not even when they finally turned to leave, their shoulders tight with frustration. I let them go, knowing they wouldn't make it, knowing they would have to figure things out without me. The elevator arrived, its soft chime cutting through the tension. I stepped inside, pressing the button for my floor. The doors closed behind me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was leaving something behind, something heavy, something that had weighed me down for far too long. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel anger or resentment. I just felt steady, like I was finally on the right path. When I arrived at my office, I sat at my desk and tried to focus on the work in front of me, but my mind kept drifting back to the scene I just witnessed. It wasn't just about them showing up at my work. It was about the way I had stood there, watching, without rushing to fix things for them. It was the first time I had let them deal with their own consequences. And it felt good. That evening, as I left the office, I received a message from my uncle Victor. He wanted to talk. My immediate instinct was to ignore it. But then I remembered what I had told myself only a few days ago. I was done letting them walk all over me. I decided to meet him. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew I needed to hear him out. When I arrived at the small cafe where we had agreed to meet, I found him already sitting at a table, his briefcase resting next to him. He looked older than I remembered, the lines around his eyes deeper. "Remi," he said when he saw me. "Thanks for agreeing to meet." I sat down, placing my hands on the table, feeling the cool surface beneath my fingertips. "What's this about, Victor?" He opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of folders. They were thick, uneven, filled to the brim with documents. "I've kept these for years," he said quietly, laying the folders in front of me. "Not because I wanted to hurt you, but because I didn't know how to tell you what was really happening. The truth? Remi, it's all in here." I felt a pit form in my stomach. What was he about to show me? Victor didn't explain further. Instead, he unclasped the folders and began laying out the documents one by one. Each page I saw was like a piece of a puzzle I had never understood until now. There were emails between family members, discussions about how to make me feel guilty about taking care of the lake house, how to convince me to cover their debts without asking questions. The more I saw, the more I realized how deeply they had manipulated me, how they had used my love for them to get what they needed. I didn't speak at first. I just let the truth wash over me, the overwhelming sense that I had been played for so long. Victor finally broke the silence. "I didn't want to be a part of this, Remi. But I couldn't stop it. I didn't know how to help you without making things worse." I sat back in my chair, my hands still on the table. I wasn't sure how to feel. The anger I expected to feel didn't come. What I felt instead was something else, something I hadn't allowed myself to feel before: clarity. The truth was laid out in front of me. And now, I knew exactly what I had to do. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady, "for showing me this." Victor nodded. "I'm sorry, Remi. I should have told you sooner." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The truth had been revealed. And now it was up to me to decide what came next. A few days later, the ripples of what I had done began to show. I wasn't sure what I expected to happen after I drew that line with my family. But the consequences weren't subtle. I had expected things to get harder, more arguments, more tension, but what I didn't anticipate was the quiet shift in how my family viewed me. The messages, the calls, the polite inquiries that used to come through with an air of entitlement, asking me to step in, asking for money, asking for my help, they all stopped. At least, not in the way they used to. But it wasn't just the absence of their demands that made it feel different. It was the quiet, unspoken distance that began to form. A cousin who used to text me regularly now canceled plans without explanation. A family friend, someone who had always supported me, suddenly pulled away when they heard pieces of the truth from Victor. The more I noticed it, the more it became clear that I wasn't the only one who had been supporting everyone else's expectations. One evening, I got a call from Jessica. "You won't believe this," she said, her voice laced with disbelief. "I ran into Aunt Susan at the store today. She asked me about you, but not in the way she used to. She said you'd changed, that you were too independent now." Changed. I repeated, shaking my head, a bitter laugh escaping before I could stop it. "Isn't that what I've been doing all along?" "Exactly," Jessica said. "They've relied on you so much, they can't even see the person you've become. It's all just about what they need." "Well, they'll have to get used to it," I said, the words sounding firmer than I'd intended. "I'm not their safety net anymore." As the days went by, the changes started to feel more like a shift in the wind than anything substantial. They weren't outright hostile. No one screamed at me. But there was a new undertone, a subtle judgment that hung in the air. It wasn't the angry confrontation I had feared. It was something quieter, something harder to pin down. And then, a few days later, I received a letter in the mail. The letterhead was familiar. It came from a bank my family had dealt with for years. My heart sank as I opened it, and my eyes scanned the words quickly, looking for the details. The letter was about refinancing. The bank had been unable to proceed with the refinancing process for my parents' home. Without my income tied to their applications, they didn't meet the requirements anymore. The reality of it hit me in waves as I read through the letter. They were struggling. And it wasn't because I had cut them off completely. It was because they had relied on me for so long that they hadn't prepared for a life without that support. I sat there in the quiet of my apartment, the letter crumpled slightly in my hands, and tried to process it. There was no sense of satisfaction, no vindication. Just a quiet, undeniable truth. They had built their lives on borrowed stability, and now that I had taken a step back, the foundation was crumbling beneath them. The feeling was heavy. It wasn't relief. It wasn't joy. It was just final. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I thought about the years I had spent giving, about how I had always put them first, and how now it felt like the roles had reversed. I had given them everything they had ever asked for, and now they had nothing left to take. But the hardest part wasn't watching their struggles. It was realizing how much I had lost in the process of trying to keep them afloat. My own needs had been buried for so long that I had barely noticed. I had become so used to being the reliable one, the strong one, that I didn't even know what it felt like to be seen for who I truly was. The next day, I received a message from my Uncle Victor. He said he wanted to meet, to talk about everything that had happened. I debated whether I should go. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but another part knew I couldn't keep running away from this. even if it meant facing the consequences head on. So, I agreed to meet him. When I sat down with Victor a few hours later, he didn't waste any time. He looked at me, his face etched with worry, and began, "I know this has been difficult for you, Remi. I just want you to understand that none of this was easy for any of us." I looked at him, searching his face for something, maybe an apology, maybe an explanation. "But you have to understand," he continued, "your family, they've relied on you for so long they don't know how to function without you. It's not just about the money or the property. It's about how much they've taken from you." "I know," I said quietly. "I've realized that, and I'm done being the one to hold everything together." Victor sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You have every right to feel that way. But they're not going to change overnight, Remi. They don't know how to, they've never had to." "I know," I repeated, my voice steady now. "But it's not my job to fix them anymore. It never was." We sat in silence for a moment, both of us absorbing the weight of what had just been said. The conversation was harder than I'd expected, but it was necessary. Victor stood up, his expression softening. "I hope you can find peace with this, Remi. I really do." "I will," I said. "I already am." As I left the cafe, the cool evening air hit me, but I didn't feel chilled. I felt lighter, like I was walking away from something I had carried for far too long. I wasn't done with everything yet. There were still decisions to be made, consequences to face. But for the first time in ages, I felt like I was walking toward something that was mine, something I had earned. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time I felt like I had a say in what came next. And that felt like freedom. The days following my meeting with Victor were quieter than I expected. My family's silence was a stark contrast to the noise I had been used to: constant calls, messages, and demands. It felt like the calm after a storm, the kind of stillness that makes you realize how much you've been holding on to without even knowing it. I spent most of that time at the lake house, focusing on what was in front of me: the repairs I'd been avoiding, the small projects that needed my attention, and the feeling of ownership that came with it. It wasn't just about the property, it was about finally taking responsibility for myself, my space, my future. There was no rush. I didn't need to hurry to make decisions or fix everything at once. For the first time, I felt like I had the luxury of breathing, of being able to sit with my choices and decide where I wanted to go next. One evening, Jessica came to visit. She arrived just before sunset, her car crunching the gravel as she pulled into the driveway. When she stepped out, there was an easy smile on her face, one that reminded me of how far I'd come. "Hey, you," she said, walking toward me with a relaxed air. "How are you holding up?" "Better?" I replied, standing up from the porch chair to greet her. "It's quieter now. A little too quiet, maybe?" She chuckled and sat next to me on the porch. "You know, it's strange hearing you say that. It sounds like you're finally okay with the silence." I looked out at the water, the ripples of the lake catching the last light of the day. "Yeah, I think I am. I don't need to fill the silence anymore, Jess. I don't have to keep trying to make everything okay for everyone else." Jessica nodded, taking a deep breath of the cool evening air. "I've seen you carry so much, Remi. You've been doing it for years. It's good to see you finally take it off." "It feels good," I said, turning to look at her. "It feels right. I'm not sure what comes next, but for the first time, I feel like it's my choice." We sat in silence for a moment, the sound of crickets chirping filling the air. It wasn't awkward, just peaceful. I had forgotten what it felt like to simply exist without the weight of responsibility pressing down on me. The next few days passed in a blur of small, quiet decisions. I finalized things with Natalie and my legal team, making sure that my financial ties to the family were severed as cleanly as possible. There were still a few loose ends to tie up, but I didn't feel rushed anymore. I knew that for once, I was making decisions for myself. A week later, I got an email from Victor. He didn't ask for anything, just sent an update on the family. My parents were facing some hard truths about their finances, but Victor mentioned that they were starting to recognize how much they had taken for granted. It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but it was a shift. I didn't reply immediately. I didn't need to. The truth was, I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't waiting for them to fix things or to apologize. I had already taken the first steps toward healing, and that was enough. One evening, I took a walk along the lake. The sun had set, leaving only a soft glow on the horizon. The water was calm, reflecting the last of the day's light. It was beautiful. I stood at the edge for a long time, listening to the quiet, watching the sky change colors. And then, I realized something. I wasn't just walking away from my family's expectations. I was walking toward my own future, the one that was entirely mine to create. I didn't know exactly what that future would look like, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid to find out. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, looking out at the lake. It was still and serene, like a blank canvas, waiting for me to decide what came next. I didn't have to have all the answers. I didn't have to know exactly what the next chapter of my life would be, but I knew this. I was no longer tied to a past that had held me back. My future was wide open, and for the first time, I could step into it without hesitation. It was mine, and that was all that mattered.